All right, what is up, everybody? Thank you for tuning in to SaberSim's DFS Office Hours. If you are watching me live, thank you so much for turning the stream on today. If you are watching this as the recording back, thank you too for giving me some of your attention here and watching our show. If it's your first time watching our show today here, thank you for tuning in. Welcome. This is a live Q&A style show where we answer questions from our users about DFS, about SaberSim, about sports betting, about sports, about the weather, whatever you guys want to talk about. Let's see. This is a live show for a reason. So we want follow-up questions. We want clarifying questions. We go pretty deep into some of the topics here and talk a lot about some of the nuance that comes up with some of this DFS strategy stuff. So if you have some follow-up questions or just some thoughts of your own, right? This is live for a reason. We want to hear from you. You can pop questions and points that you want to make or whatever in the Office Hours channel, in our Slack channel, or in YouTube chat here. So we want you guys to be a part of the conversation on this show. This show is daily, Monday through Friday at 2 p.m. Eastern. Also for a reason, right? This is not a tout show. This is not a pick show, but we use the slates and the players and the information we have for the games on any given day to talk about DFS strategy and to use as examples. So when we have a big MLB slate, we'll talk a little big slate strategy. When we have weather concerns, we'll talk weather concerns. When we have showdowns, we talk a little showdowns. We talk whatever really makes sense for that day, right? So let's see. I mentioned this is a daily show at 2 p.m. Eastern. On Thursdays, we use this time slot for what we call a strategy session. And we go deep into a specific topic related to DFS, something that has been coming up often in Office Hours or Slack recently. Normally, we pull some other members from the SaberSim team into that conversation, and I am excited to say that I think I mentioned it yesterday, but tomorrow's strategy session is going to be a esports specific strategy session. We're going to be talking some Counter-Strike. We're going to be talking some League of Legends. I think the LCS just got started back up again for League. I know that there are seems like pretty much daily CSGO slates as well. So I am very excited for that esports strategy session, particularly to learn a little bit myself. I haven't really played too much esports DFS. We are bringing in some folks on the SaberSim team who have. So please tune in tomorrow, 2 p.m. Eastern. This will be a esports themed strategy session. And if you have questions for us for that show at any point from really now until 2 p.m. tomorrow, pop them into Office Hours, email our support at sabersim.com, and let us know what questions you have about esports, and we will get to them live on stream. We've done 2 of those strategy sessions already so far. 2 weeks ago, we did a sports betting strategy session, and a week ago, we did an NBA short slates and showdown strategy session. So those are both posted on our YouTube channel. If you haven't checked those out already, go give them a watch. They are great. They are packed full of information that you really need to know if you are into sports betting or have been playing these NBA playoff showdowns and short slates. We had a lot of fun with those. There is a lot of great information. I learned a ton on those streams and have gotten just a little bit better on my NBA showdown and short slate strategy. So let's see. I think that pretty much does it for housekeeping. I mentioned yesterday as well, next week's strategy session, we are actually going to do a U.S. Open golf strategy session. And since that tournament starts on Thursday morning, we are going to move that strategy session to Wednesday afternoon of next week. So more on that to come. That will be next week. We'll make sure that you guys know exactly when the let's see when that strategy session will be next week, and we will cross that bridge when we get to it, I guess. I know we have had a lot of folks emailing the support at sabersim.com email address this week, talking about some questions that they have answered on this. They want answered on this show. I know we are starting to reach some more people on YouTube here as well. So thank you so much, everybody that has submitted questions and is tuning in and is making this show possible. We have heard from our users for a long time that you guys love our product and want some content. So we're just getting started here. We've got a lot more to come, but thank you all for making this show possible so far. And we'll continue to move forward. So I'm going to go ahead and get started here in just a moment. We have a bunch of questions that have come in through Slack and through support over the last 24 hours. So we've got a lot to get to today. If you have a question and you want to answer it on this stream, and you can pop that question into YouTube chat, you can pop that question into Office Hours, or if you want it answered on the Office Hours Slack channel, sorry. And if you want it answered tomorrow or in the next stream or something like that, emailing support@sabersim.com is fine. A few users have emailed us and said they are a little bit confused on how exactly to get this link every day. So if you're watching this, the link does change every day. It is the same link that you would use to watch it live, is the same YouTube link after the recording is published later that day. And we post the new link every single day in our Slack channel. So if you don't have access to our Slack channel and you are a SaberSim subscriber, email us, support@sabersim.com. We'll get you into Slack. We are working on getting this up on our site too as well, so that users can just kind of go in without being in Slack or having to check Slack every day, can just get the link quickly and watch the stream. So more to come there. I mentioned we have a lot of questions so far, so I am going to just get right into it here today. Let's see, with some of these questions that came in our Office Hours channel. So I think this one actually came in yesterday afternoon. This one is from Shiver Me Ginger. And he said, I've noticed no matter the slate, the min projection never changes. NBA has 15 for 2-game slate and 15 for a 10-game slate. Do people employ strats for a 2-gamer in lowering this to say 10 to capture extreme variations / diversity for things like blowout, or raise to 20 in a 10-game slate to remove dud plays? Shiver Me Ginger, you kind of stole my thunder here. I think you are definitely on the right track with what you have started the kind of general answer here. I would say before I jump into this on my end, if you haven't, check out that Showdown's NBA short slate strategy video that's up on our YouTube channel, because we do talk a little bit more about this in detail. But I'm going to go ahead and pull up SaberSim here and note a few things. First off, that what you mentioned, they are typically 15-point min projection. That is true for all but Showdown. On Showdown, we do drop this down to 5 to allow more players in. And some background on what this number is specifically on the NBA. What you are looking at is essentially 5x return, 5x value, based on whatever the min salary is for the contest. So you see in a Showdown, the minimum salary on DraftKings is going to be 1,000. So the min projection is 5. And in a normal contest, which we don't have tonight, but I was going to actually take us back to, we might as well look at some of these older slates here, because we're getting close to the end of the season. But on like an 8-game slate or something like that, for example, we have 15-point min projection, and that is because the min salary is 3,000, right? And you hear this rule of thumb about 5x value is what you're looking for in DFS. So basically just kind of to prevent users from getting very low projected players in the pool, especially if you are going and cranking smart diversity way up or something like that, or running builds that would allow that to otherwise happen. We do put that in there just to kind of stop that. So talking about strategy here, again, Shiver Me Ginger, I think you nailed it, right? On a very small slate, you are limiting your pool from players that you may potentially, let's go back to today, you may potentially want actually, well, we'll actually do yesterday since we had a 2-gamer, because there's just not that many players to play with, right? So if we're looking at projections and we're looking at a 15 minimum projection, we lose out on quite a few players here that, of course, don't have very good value, aren't projected very well, but on a 2-game slate in a playoff game could very easily get a shot to get in the game. And you see guys like this. Ivica Zubac had 29 points last night. Rondo had almost 20. Favors even had 17. Some of these guys you can see coming all the way down. Shake Milton is somebody we had projected very low. It wasn't known. We didn't really think he was going to get any minutes at all. And even he got in the game and did pretty good, right? So you can see this here, how that happens. So I would say that can be a very strong strategy, at least selectively, is opening up your minimum projection to get access to some of these players that are very low owned, that have a low chance of success, but you have a small player pool to work with. And sometimes you need to take some shots, right? So in that NBA Showdowns and short slate strategy video, Max actually talks a little bit more about how you can kind of add some additional value here and do some of your own research to figuring out which of these plays are maybe guys that actually could get on the floor. So again, I'd go check that out. I'm not going to go into detail there right now, just because we have a ton to get through today. But I will say, on a bigger slate, we'll come back here. So we on a smaller slate, I think it definitely makes sense that you might want to drop this down a little bit. I would say a good way to do this is to look at the lowest projected player that you're really interested in rostering, and set it there, right? So if I was just looking at this, I don't know exactly how I ended up doing this last night, but maybe your line is drawn at Patrick Beverley, right? Guy that we at least, or let's say maybe like this, right? So we can look at minutes. Maybe we draw a line here, right? We want to know, at least we're thinking their mean output in terms of minutes is 10 points or more. So maybe we capture it here. We drop this down and we get everyone that has a projection over 9, which is going to allow us to open up the pool, right? So on a bigger slate, let's go back to something from the middle of the year, like this February 8th on a Monday slate. We had 8 games. You can do the opposite, right? So if we look and we close this over here and we just look at player projections and we start coming over here. Okay, so you can see where that 15-point line is drawn right about here. And you are going to get access to some players that are not going to play that much, right? Mason Jones. This was when we were getting serious Houston chalk value earlier this season, right? Has a 15-point projection. He's min salary. He has a 5.24 value, theoretically good, but he's only going to play 13 minutes. You've got all these players in the pool. It may not necessarily be true that you want to have access to all of those players down to 15 points. So you can do the same thing here, right? You can use minutes. You can use some of your own research. A good way to just do this is to figure out exactly where that last player that you'd be willing to roster is in your pool. So something that I've kind of been doing, at least the way I like to do my research, is I look for kind of the first player that really pops in terms of minutes or has a spectacular value that I know I definitely want some of. Somebody that could be that is PJ Tucker, who's playing 34 minutes. Again, this is a very old slate, so this is just an example. That might be a signal to me that maybe I'm setting my minimum projection at 17.8 to get him in there. Another indication to me is a player that is 6x valued or higher. Sometimes I use that as a key. So in this case, maybe I set it at 18 as my min projection and run it from there, which removes some of those players from your pool there. So I think that is it's a great way to add some value to your process, especially in a sport like basketball where projections are very reliable. In a sport like baseball, I would be a little bit more cautious about doing too much there because you may end up removing some potential stack opportunities, right? If we look at batters, I think this is commonly set at 4, with the goal being to get pretty much all of the batters that are playing that are in the lineup in your pool. So let's see kind of what that looks like. Went too far. Okay, so yeah, so it's normally set at 4 or 5, which is going to get every batter in your pool. If you set it up to something like 6, you are going to start crossing off some of these lower batting order players that you might otherwise get. And maybe that's still fine. Maybe that is your perspective. You want to only play full batting order stacks for teams that are projected to hit very well, and you want to cross off some of the bottom order guys that aren't expected to hit very well. That's totally fine. This could be a way to do that, but you're going to limit your pool a little more dramatically. You're going to limit some roster constructions by just chopping off some players in baseball here with minimum projections. So Shiver Me Ginger, hopefully that helped. If you are watching this live, let me know if that was clear. Again, I'm going to keep us rolling fast today because I have a ton to get through. So I'm going to try to explain things as clear as possible and then move us on. But if I'm not being clear, first, most important thing is that you guys feel like you're getting something out of this. So please let me know if at any point there's a question. In the meantime, I'm going to move us on to the next question. This one also came in our Office Hours channel. This one came from Christian here. And let me see Let's pop this into chat. And he said, on today's office hours, it would be great if you could go over adjusting the correlation slider when forcing 5-man stacks in MLB for big slates, so you aren't getting any full game stacks in lineups, such as 5-2 and 5-3 stacks from the same game. Tried adjusting the slider down to moderate on yesterday's slate and still got some game stacks mixed in. And on 12+ game slates, it seems like that's not the right approach with so many different games. Was planning to try to set it to low on today's slate to see if that helps, but any suggestions would be great. Okay, so there's a few things I want to note here first off. So I'm going to take us back to yesterday's big 15-game slate to take a look at this. I'm going to run a build, and I'm going to talk about a few things right off the bat. So Christian, it seems like what I assume you were probably doing here is running, let's see, a bunch of lineups. So we'll just say we're doing 150 max because I want to see a lot of lineups. And you said forcing 5-man stacks. I assume you're doing it this way by saying the manual stacking rule. I want 5 players from the same team, right? So we'll go ahead and pop that in here, and let's build a quick set of lineups and take a look at this. While this is building, I will say a few notes on kind of what I'm expecting here. I ran a test build earlier in preparation for this question. So a few things we'll see. One, personally, I don't think we're getting out of line game stacks here. I was just kind of doing some quick looking through, and I don't think, obviously, maybe you don't want 100% of your lineups to have game stacks. That would be an indication that something might be up. But at the same time, I don't think we need to intentionally avoid game stacks in baseball. We'll see in a moment here, actually, that batters on the opposite sides do have some very minor positive correlation, something that we will pick up with the correlation slider. But it's close enough to 0 that, to me, it's more on that line of I don't really want to necessarily avoid that game stack, and I'm also not forcing them. So we'll see what happens here in a second when this build completes, but we'll give this a second. Gail, I see your question here. I also have a few of your questions from an email that we got from you yesterday in our queue. So I will go ahead. I will make sure we get to this question that you just asked in YouTube chat before the end of the show today. So I do have some of your other questions as well in our queue. Just giving this a minute to finish up building. I want a 150 max build for this to show, just because I want to have a lot of lineups here in my pool for the purpose of talking about this question. So we will just give that a second. Allow me to catch my breath here. I have noticed, too, that the builder can take just a tiny bit longer when we force a stacking rule. Not too long, but it does take a little bit longer while it's kind of working around that rule. So, okay. So let's see what we're getting here. We'll change a projection. Okay, so we all remember yesterday, ton of Houston stacks, right? So what I was looking at earlier here, is I was going ahead and clicking stacks. If you don't already know, you can do a pretty cool thing here, where if you click this little magnifying glass, it is going to filter your lineups to only show your lineups that include that stack. And even cooler is it actually will show your then exposure that matches that stack, right? So you can see here, right? We actually have 20%. We have 30 lineups of Milwaukee stacks. And then if we highlight our Houston stacks, that will say 100. We have 21 Milwaukee stacks paired with Houston stacks. So it's a pretty good idea to get an idea of what your lineups look like, right? And Houston played Boston yesterday. So you see we do have 8% Boston. Again, to me, that's not something that's necessarily out of control there. Our next most popular was the Yankees, who I think played the Twins. 6% Twins lineups that match up there. And if we click on a player that is, click on a batter and go ahead and take a look at their correlations. So we'll look at someone like Carlos Correa. You can see he is mostly correlated with Houston batters. That makes sense. That stands up with what we expect. He has some positive correlations with some pitchers on the other side, which is interesting. But you do see there are some just minor, very close to zero correlations with other hitters. So something that might very slightly get picked up, but isn't very much going to force you to play game stacks one way or the other. But let's go ahead and say we don't want to do that, right? And that's totally fine. If we want to avoid game stacks completely, I would say your best bet is to just do that with another stacking rule. So Christian, if you wanted to avoid game stacks in the future, what we can do, and I'm going to go ahead and switch this now down to 20 just so we get a faster build. We already have, I don't know why, this is something that only happens on my local machine here, but this max exposure keeps getting set lower. But you can actually set a second stack. So we have at least 5 players from the same team. We can actually set another stack rule, and we can say no more than 5 players from the same game, right? So this is going to now build lineups that do both of these things. 5-man stack every team, every way, but no more than 5 players from the same game, which is basically going to say, don't ever give me a batter on the other side, playing on the other side of my stack, right? So if we then go ahead and build our pool here, we'll let that run for a second. Again, I think this will cause the builder to just take maybe a little bit longer again now because it has 2 rules it has to think about as it's putting things together. But what this should do is completely avoid any game stacks whatsoever. So let's go ahead and see what happens here. So now if we see New York, we have no Minnesota, right? Same thing. Milwaukee, I think, played Cincinnati. No Cincinnati. So that would be the easiest way to say, like, no matter what, I don't want to game stack a game. It would be to set that secondary stacking rule to avoid that from happening. Just remember, too, I guess last point on this before we move on, right? There were a lot of games yesterday that were very game stackable by their own merits, right? Milwaukee and Cincinnati, we had both those teams at 5 implied runs or greater. This New York, Minnesota game, Houston and Boston was a great one. Mets, Orioles, right? You actually will see this happen pretty often because 2 teams playing in the same games are playing in the same park, right? Coors, you're going to often get a lot of, when Coors Field is on the slate, you're going to get Coors game stacks because both of those teams are getting to hit at Coors. Same thing here, right? Fenway's a good hitter's park. The Astros and Red Sox were both getting to hit at Fenway yesterday. So they come across as a good game stack. So just something to consider. My personal take on strategy is I would not intentionally try to avoid game stacks. I don't think you add value by doing that, but should you want to, you absolutely can by setting a manual stacking rule. So Christian, if you are watching, hopefully that was helpful. If you have some follow-up questions for me, just shoot them right over. We will jump right back into it. But for now, I am going to move us along. Okay, so let's go ahead and jump into our next question. I'm going to take us back to today's slate of games. Let's go ahead and look at the main slate tonight. This question came in through our support channels. This was from Ted. Ted said he was having a lot of trouble using the entry editor and asked if someone could kind of walk through the whole process and demo exactly how it's supposed to work. So I'm going to go ahead and do that now. So basically, you know, the entry editor is supposed to make the lineup management process quite a bit easier. And I would recommend that you try to do as much of it as possible on SaberSim. So what that means here is when you go to this entry tab, we're going to prompt you to upload your entries file. And a common place I see users mess up right out of the gate is they will have gone to DraftKings and they're on the entry page. And they either, you can see I'm playing all these slates, right? They either download the wrong slate from DraftKings, or they are on the lineup. I think this is another. They're on the lineup page, and they download the template, the empty template file for uploading lineups, right? And these two screens look very familiar, or they look very similar. It can be pretty confusing here. So when I say do as much of this on SaberSim as possible, I'm referring to using this download template file button as much as you can, right? So make sure you have the right slate selected. We're playing DraftKings, we're playing baseball. It's June 9th, and I'm looking at the main slate. And if you just click download template file from DraftKings, we're going to do the hard part for you. So we're going to pop this up. You guys can't see this here because of my screen share, but it's prompting me to save or open the entries file. I'm going to save it. Then I'm going to click upload entry file. You guys still can't see this, unfortunately, here, but I'm navigating towards where I just downloaded that file and uploading it. And boom, it's going to pop in all of these contests I'm playing on the main slate tonight, right? Playing a bunch of different contests here. And then we can go ahead and run our build. So for the purpose of time here, I'm just going to go ahead and build a default 20 max lineup contest. I'm fine with using all the default settings. And we're going to let this build here. Ted, if you are watching this back, I got the general sense from your email that you were struggling most with the process of uploading files to SaberSim and then downloading them and then re-uploading them to the sites. So I'm going to focus on that, and I'm going to breeze through this process a little bit more because it sounds like you were doing okay here with this process. So I'm just going to assume that you're having no issues running your build or anything like that. And I'm just going to take this exactly as it is. So, okay, so we've got a build here. I'm not going to touch this at all. If we go back to the entries tab, you can use this button that says fill contests with lineups. And it's going to ask you basically how you want to fill. So first of all, it's going to ask for your specific build. This is another place where it's important to make sure you click the right one. So I only have one here. So I'm just going to go ahead and click that. Rank is going to, I guess in this case, rank makes a lot of sense. It's going to use the first lineup in every contest that has at least one lineup. Then it's going to use the second lineup in every contest that has at least 2 entries. And then the third, the biggest contests I'm playing are 20 maxes, which is why I built 20. So I'm just going to use rank for now, and I'm going to fill. And you're now going to see every contest has associated lineups with them. My exposure is all populated. My fill method is correct. This all looks good, right? Okay. So now when I speak about using SaberSim as much as possible in this step, this is the next part where that comes into play, right? You click download and you have 2 options. You can click download entries or download and open DraftKings. Both of them are just going to prompt you to download your entries file. But if you click download and open entries, we are also going to take you to the right page. I'm going to close this to upload that file, right? There are other pages on DraftKings that aren't going to do what you are looking for, right? There is a page on DraftKings to upload lineups, not entries, but actual lineups. There is a page on DraftKings. I think that's probably the one that most people get tied up on. So I would recommend as often as possible to click download and open DraftKings, and you're going to see it's going to take you right there. In another window here, I'm being prompted to save my file. So I'm going to save it, use this upload CSV, navigate to the file you just downloaded, and click it and upload, and you see we should be good to go. So this link is DraftKings.com/entry/upload. The other confusing link that people end up on is lineup/upload. I just would never use this. I don't know why people, I don't know who uses this, to be completely honest. This allows you to just upload a lineup file rather than your actual entries. I would just make sure you try to avoid being on this page, right? Our entry editor isn't set up to do this, and I really don't know why anyone would do that. So you want to be on entry/upload, and that will take care of it. So Ted, hopefully that was helpful. If you have any questions about that process, or if I went too quick at any one point, let me know. Again, the 2 things that happen most often, I feel like time and time again when we hear users are having issues with the entry editor, is they have downloaded a file from DraftKings that is not matched up to the right slate that you're looking at. And you can avoid that by using our download template file from DraftKings link, which will automatically match up to the slate you've already selected. And then secondly, uploading to the wrong spot on DraftKings. So you always want to make sure you're on entry/upload, and you can avoid having to even think about it by using the download and open DraftKings option here. Ted's specific question was for DraftKings, and it was on a desktop, so that's what I covered here. I know there have been some questions recently about the mobile experience, and I know some of you folks probably have questions about FanDuel. So I don't want to just jump into those right now because I haven't had a question about that for today's show, and I have a lot of questions in the queue to get to. But if you have issues on mobile or you want me to do the same thing for FanDuel, I would be happy to do so. So just let me know if that's the case. But hopefully that was helpful to walk through DraftKings entry editor. So I realized I had the previous question up on the screen the whole time as we were doing that, but hopefully that wasn't too confusing. So, all right, keeping us moving. We got a lot to get through. Okay, so we had a couple questions that also came in through support. These were from Chase, and really he sent two questions. I think they're kind of similar. And let me type these up here, and I'll pop them on the screen. Okay, so Chase asked, what is taken into account with your projections, and how do I know when to take a stand on a player? And I think really what we're getting at here, and this is another question that comes up a lot, right? If the projections take into account all of this information, all of these different stats, why would I ever edit anything, right? How do I know when to edit something? How do I know when to fade a player or to lock a player in? Why would I do anything to my projections or exposures other than just let the builder rock? First things, to be completely honest, that's perfectly fine a lot of times, right? It does not necessarily need to be that every single slate you are approaching it with this kind of grand philosophy about the slate that you're going to kind of impart your wisdom on to SaberSim. And you just don't need to do that, right? And part of the beauty of SaberSim is that we're not using Vegas as a general signal here. So what that means is we are already distancing ourselves from the field quite a bit, right? So if we look at like what Vegas thinks about the slate, we're going to have a different perspective comparatively on, let's just pick a team, Dodgers 5-2, Dodgers 4-6, right? Right off the bat, we are quite a bit more bearish than the field is going to be on the Dodgers. And that's going to distance you from what the field is already doing, right? You are distanced from other SaberSim players because of smart diversity, since smart diversity is going to be generally fairly high on most of these slates, or at least not zero. You are going to get a different subset of simulations for every single game on every single lineup that you build than anyone else using SaberSim. So you're going to be distanced from other SaberSim users too. But let's say you want to have an impact on the projections and you want to tweak things around. How do you know when to do that? There's a few things here. I would say in general, your best bet is going to be not hunting for that one elusive statistic that just isn't taken account into the model, because the model takes into account a great deal of historical information and statistics already. And if there was easily something that we could say, oh, we're actually not taking into account park factors, for example, we would then just incorporate that into the model, right? So that's not the way I would think about it. I would think about a couple things. I would look for signals from other sharp sources of information that are differing from what SaberSim is doing, right? So one of the reasons we always look at Vegas, right? Vegas, their models and sharp sports bettors have different models, and they're going to use that information. They're going to take the same inputs as SaberSim is, and they may come up with a different output. And that's why we always talk about Vegas, for example, right? So let's see if we can find one where Vegas has moved dramatically throughout the day. So this was on the early slate, but maybe that's okay. Let's look at the early here. So the Cubs have dropped a half run before their game started, right? So they started at 3-6. We have them at 3-4, and they've dropped now to 3-1, right? One way to approach this in terms of adding value to your projections would be to say, you know what? There's been a lot of money coming in on, and there are better places to do this research in terms of like actually looking at sharp money versus total number of bets and things like that. But let's just assume that we feel like the money coming in on the Cubs run total is sharp and it's driven the run total down. A good way to add some value here might be to drop the SaberSim projection down, right? So we started lower than Vegas did, but they dropped a half run throughout the day. And one way you could add a little value to your process here would be maybe to drop the Cubs down a little further. You'll probably get more Darvish. You'll get less Cubs. We've used what we feel like is an intelligent signal to do that. And we didn't go and hunt for some rogue statistic or anything like that influenced to do that, but we looked at a sharp other source of information that used the same inputs that maybe disagreed or was a little bit more aggressive on a take, and we adjusted from there, right? And those signals can be whatever, right? That's kind of where some of your other research comes in. We have a video on our YouTube channel. I believe it is called the 6 or 7 secrets of MLB DFS. I'll have to go dig it up. In that video, I think that was actually from last year, but we've got Max and Matt and Danny. They talk a little bit more about their individual sources that they go to look for these kinds of things. Like when I say intelligent signals, they talk a little bit more about where you can find those kinds of things. But that's a good place to start when you're asking this question, right? Is not looking for things that we're not taking into account with the model, but look at other intelligent people that are taking the same inputs as we are that maybe disagree and see where you land on that spectrum from where SaberSim is to somebody else or something like that. That might be somebody else, some other like DFS content provider in certain cases, right? There's a lot of free stuff out there. I think it's a great idea if people are looking at different sources of information and comparing and seeing how that affects their priors and updating from there. The last note I will say on this before I move on, another great way to add value here in this stage is to take advantage of opportunities where there isn't a lot of historical data and there isn't a lot of information in general, because those situations are going to be very difficult to project across the industry. Nobody's going to be able to do that very well, right? So the other day, we had Jackson Kowar on the mound, right? That was Monday, I think. Rookie pitcher for the Royals. Yeah. So we had this little 2-gamer. Jackson Kowar was on the mound. He's a rookie pitcher. Rookie pitchers are hard to project, right? We have a pretty cool minor league model that takes what players did in the minor leagues and then kind of translates it to what we expect to happen in the majors, which is pretty slick. But that's just a difficult situation to project for anyone, right? This guy hasn't pitched in the major leagues yet. This is another situation where maybe you can be a little bit more aggressive with taking your stance on this player one way or the other. We see he got lit up, right? The Angels just ended up blowing him up. But it's a situation that would have been difficult to project for anyone because there's not a lot of information. Same thing in the NBA, right? When we get word all of a sudden that a starter like Giannis or someone in the regular season is sitting out, or Giannis and Middleton and Drew Holiday are all sitting out, right? That situation came up a few times throughout the season. The first time a situation like that comes up, all the projection systems in the world are all going to update. They're going to run things back through. They're going to give you their projections, but no one really knows how to project that situation very accurately because it hasn't happened very much. So that's another situation. Look for times where there's not a lot of historical data, there's not a lot of past information, and take advantage of those spots to take your stand, right? When a team is putting out their normal front five in basketball and they're going up against another team that's putting out their front five, and there's no injuries and everything's pretty typical, projections in that case are going to be pretty good. That might be a situation where you don't really need to make so much moves. So, Chase, hopefully that was helpful. I don't know if you had the opportunity to watch us live here or not. If not, and you watch this recording back later, just let me know if you have any other follow-up questions. Happy to talk about this further. This is a deep topic, right? This is really getting at like the bulk of DFS strategy is adding your value and tweaking things around. And there's a lot to unpack here. So happy to talk about that a little bit more. But that's kind of where I would start there. So, all right, we are zipping. We are already 39 minutes into this show. I am going to keep us moving. We're on a pretty good track right now, but I got to keep the pace up here. So, Gail, if you're still watching here, I've got your questions that you had sent us via support coming up here. And we'll talk about those first. So, boom. First question. Do the simulations take into account abnormal performances? For instance, if Curry goes 2 for 11 last night, he's not likely to do that again tonight. Or do we have to tweak projections to account for that? I want to talk about a few things here and clarify a few points. So I'm not going to use the Curry example because Curry's not playing basketball anymore. He's gone fishing for the summer. But we can talk about somebody like Jokic. And we absolutely do take into account abnormal performances in the simulations, right? And you can see that by clicking on a player and looking at their range of outcomes. And you can see somebody like Jokic projected for a cool 57 points tonight, 4.87 value, highest projected play on the slate by a mile, just won MVP. By all accounts, probably going to have a pretty good game tonight. But wait a minute. 40% of the time, or excuse me, not 40, 5% of the time only scores 40 points. It's probably a bit of a letdown. 2% of the time scores even less than that, right? So abnormal performances on both sides of the spectrum are absolutely taken into account in our simulations. And that's really what part of the reason of what makes these simulations so cool. It's what makes smart diversity such a awesome tool to be able to plug into your lineup building process, because we are with a higher smart diversity, like you see on a showdown slate, right? We've got it at 10. We're picking single game simulations to determine what Jokic's projection is for any lineup we build, right? So we build one lineup and pull the simulation out of the hat here, and he scored 50, right? And maybe we want to use him. That's a little bit of a disappointment. Maybe we don't. And then the next one, he scores 80, right? Big outlier ceiling performance. He's probably our captain in that lineup. And then in the next one, he scores 40, right? And probably maybe just a fade, doesn't even show up in the lineup at all, right? So we do take into account those outlier performances. Now, do you need to tweak projections to account for that? The answer is no, and primarily just because we account for those outlier performances. But Gail, I do just want to mention real quick and make sure that you're kind of thinking through this in the way that makes sense here. Because you mentioned if Curry goes 2 for 11 last night, he's not likely to do that again tonight. Using again the Jokic example, let's say he didn't actually have a very good game last time he was out, I don't think. But he is not less likely to have another bad game tonight because he had one last time he was out. And that line of thinking is actually the gambler's fallacy, funny enough. But I recommend taking a look at this. But basically what that says is kind of the idea that if you're flipping a coin 5 times in a row and you get heads all 5 times, thinking that, well, the 6th time has got to be tails, right? It's kind of a misunderstanding of the law of large numbers, which basically says things can converge on their mathematical average the larger the sample size is. Jokic or any stud player is not more likely to have a good game after having a bad game. So I would not go and adjust, using your example again. If Curry did have a really bad night, I wouldn't go and bump his projection up the next night. We account for the player's true range of outcomes on every slate, and we capture both floor and ceiling outcomes, and that should suffice there. So, Gail, it sounds like you were watching us earlier. Let me know if that helps answer that question. I'm going to move right into your next question here, and I actually think this will probably be a quick one because I've covered this quite a bit already here just in that last question. Do the SaberSim point projections derive from the simulations? If so, are they adjusted with each sim? The answer to both of those questions is yes. So when you see my projection, that is the player's mean average point in every simulation we have for that player's game. So on average, across every simulation, Jokic scores 57.43 points. That's not actually a possible score, right? He can't actually score that value. That is a mathematical mean average, right? So total points scored across every simulation divided by total number of simulations. And it does update with every sim. You'll see here our timestamp, last updated 11:37 a.m. Those will change as information comes out, and it adjusts every time we sim the game. If you are not already in our Slack channel, we have alerts channel set up in Slack for all of our sports that will actually tell you when we are running a sim for a game. They are also plugged into the Fantasy Alerts Twitter channels. So it's a very easy way to see, especially when news breaks, when our sim kicks off. So if you are not in Slack already, just another reason to get in there. But this is always a good way to look at that, is this timestamp here that will tell you the last time we ran a sim. So I think your last question, Gail, ties right back into that. And let's go ahead and keep us rocking here. And the final question here was, how often is the player pool updated with player data? When I go into DK, I'm finding MLB lineups that include players that DK has already designated as non-starters. But when I go to SaberSim, those players are still in the player pool. If you're waiting until a new sim is run to incorporate that news, I'd like to know why you don't at least take them out of the player pool so we don't continue to get them. We run our sims pretty fast after we get updated lineups, especially in baseball. I can just look here again at that Sims channel. So like, for example, just 5 minutes ago, the Tigers lineup came out. And we ran a new sim for Seattle and Detroit immediately after that. It looks like that is now done. So let's go ahead and see if we have the Tigers lineup now in there. So we do have the confirmed Tigers lineup now in there. I mean, I would say like a couple points on this real quick is, I would just recommend waiting until close to lock, or at least until every game is confirmed. And when a game is totally confirmed, both teams' lineups are confirmed. We'll put a check here to run your lineups, right? There can be a little delay, especially when there's a ton of news breaking in how quickly that sim runs, and it's a little bit different sport to sport. It does happen pretty fast most of the time. So I would say, you know, part of what's nice about being in that Sims alert channel and being in Slack is you can actually see news break, sim run, news break, sim run, and make sure everything's in. And you can also see when the sim's complete. But I mean, I would say in general, just make sure that, you know, if you didn't see Detroit having these green check marks and the order didn't match what you were seeing on your end, probably not the right time to build lineups just yet. But we are, especially as we approach lock, pretty diligently checking every team up until lock and making sure that everything's coming in correctly. So hopefully that kind of helps answer that question. Let me make sure I like answered every point here. Yeah, I mean, the last note here is if you're waiting for a new sim to run to incorporate that news, I'd like to know why you at least don't take them out of the player pool so you don't continue to get them. We actually do that for players that are like specifically marked out. So like, let's say news breaks at the exact same time where a certain player is out and then the starting lineup comes out. We'll actually automatically, what should happen is the player should just get marked as out in the app immediately, and then a new sim will run that includes the correct starting lineup from there. So let's see. So I'm gonna go ahead and jump here, Gail. I saw you did also ask earlier, where do your projected ownership numbers come from? What is actually happening here is we basically take into account aggregate projection models from a kind of around the industry to see what in general the field is thinking about a slate. And then what we actually do is in effect simulate the slate to get an idea of what possible lineups are, and then use those for our ownership numbers, right? So it's baked into the sim engine. So every time a sim runs, we should have updated ownership numbers. For that team, I think that is true only as we approach lock, right? So you can see for Detroit here, we don't have ownership numbers for some of these new bottom of the lineup guys that got announced in. We will later as we get closer to lock, we rerun that. But we actually run like thousands of possible lineup options for what actual real lineup somebody might be able to make, and then use those to help generate our ownership projections. So what is really nice about that is that it does not require a lot of hand holding. It allows us to update our ownership numbers extremely quickly when news breaks close to lock, which is an advantage of it. And it also allows us to have ownership numbers for kind of niche, smaller slates. So we have this 2-gamer afternoon slate here that starts at 3:37 Eastern. And we do have ownership numbers for a slate like this because we are actually in effect, like simulating possible lineups that somebody might play in this contest and using those for ownership. So I do know that some folks have mentioned before that they feel our ownership numbers can be a little conservative, especially on the high end. We do not always necessarily project players on the high end for maybe how likely they are to be owned. I think this is a good example where Lynn and Cole are probably likely maybe to be a tick higher owned than that. But we are extremely accurate, I think, in looking at the order or the ranking of ownership. And this depends a lot on your... oh, sorry, just got a Slack message. This depends a lot on your contest, too. That's another thing that's difficult about ownership. We are simulating, anytime you see our ownership numbers, what you are looking at is our projected ownership for like the biggest GPP on that slate is the way to think about it. So if you are playing single entry contests and small single entries, ownership is going to condense significantly on the best plays, right? The smaller the contest, the more ownership is going to condense. The less lineups each player can play, the more ownership is going to condense. So this should be for a very wide, large field GPP. You can add value here, of course, by updating this based on the contest that you're playing and what you expect to happen. And you can also add value here by using other signals to add information, right? So something that can be useful is, we already talked about the Dodgers, right? 4.6. Let's take a look at what the Dodgers batting ownership looks like tonight. Fairly modest, I would say, so far for a 12-game slate. Maybe not too bad, but if you feel like, especially if the Dodgers continue to rise throughout the day and maybe go into lock with, so they're not the highest implied total, but they're close. Actually, let's just look at the highest implied total, right? That's Boston. So if we think Boston is going to be the chalkiest team and you don't think these ownership numbers totally get there, totally fine to bump these up a little bit, right? Very easy way to do that is to just multiply them by 2. I do that all the time, actually, is if I think we're a little off on a team, I'll just go through and quickly, like, does not need to be exact, but off the top of my head, kind of get close to multiplying these all by 2. And you can add a little extra value here by just popping those up. But this will continue to tighten up throughout the day, too. So that is, in a nutshell, without kind of getting into the model itself, which I don't know as much about. That's kind of how our ownership numbers come from. So, okay, 51 minutes in. I have answered every question here that was kind of directly asked of me in either the Office Hours channel or on support. So we're in a pretty good spot. This is a good time for me to say, with 8 minutes left, if you have any other questions that you would like me to answer, please fire them away now, and I will get to them here in our last 8 minutes or so. If not, or while I'm waiting for other questions to come in, I did want to just jump back to an interesting conversation that took place yesterday. And now I can't find the message. Oh, I can find it. Let me see. Okay, so this actually came in from Mike in the NBA channel yesterday. And he asked, so why are the default settings for NBA with zero for correlation? Wouldn't we want to at least set it at 1? This is a great question. This sparked an interesting conversation on Slack. Just, again, another reason to get into our Slack, right? Like, it's just awesome to watch this organic conversation about correlation in NBA take place here on the heels of this message. But I wanted to talk about a couple things for those of you that didn't get the chance to see this, because I think there's some really strong notes here from our community. So I think as a group, everyone pretty well covered this. But first off, Safo mentioned correlations in NBA are basically 0. I would say in general that you are pretty accurate, that for the most part, correlations of NBA players approach 0. And you can actually see that by clicking on any player and clicking and viewing their correlations. What really, another way to think about this is correlations for NBA players really approach 0 over the full set of simulations, right? So there are situations where two players may be positively correlated with each other, like if that game goes to double overtime or something like that. There are correlations where those two players may also be negatively correlated. So thinking about someone like Jokic, for example, if Jokic gets into foul trouble in a certain simulation, he is going to underperform. Someone like Millsap might get his minutes, and they are in that simulation negatively correlated, maybe very negatively correlated. But if that game goes to double overtime, even if they're never on the floor together, they may be positively correlated. So correlations here in general kind of hover around zero over the full set of simulations we have for that game. But Safety Dance then made a great point that says there is correlation built in when you use really high smart diversity. And I think that is really getting at the nuts of what is going on here, right? So when you're building your lineups and your smart diversity is at something like 10, we are going to use single game simulations to determine the projections we use for every single lineup we build. So we get the game where Jokic gets into foul trouble and Millsap plays a lot of minutes. We get the game that goes into double overtime and everyone has a big game, right? We are picking out such small buckets of simulations that we can really naturally account for correlations without needing to turn correlations up. Because smart diversity is so high, right? We're picking single game simulations out. So a couple other notes on that. If we do go back to a larger slate, let's pick something out like maybe from December. Fridays normally have really big slates. 5 games. No, I want like a big slate. Let's see. 7. That might just have to do. 5. Man, where are the big slates? The hell? All right. Excuse my language. Sorry. All right. 7-game slate will work, right? So if we look at a 7-game slate, we can kind of see correlation does start to creep up a little bit more. It actually will creep up more at a lower entry limit contest. And I think it will continue to creep up a little bit. So the more entries per person you have, you'll see generally a higher correlation for NBA, and the bigger the contest, you'll see a higher correlation, right? And this type of correlation is not so much the same kind of correlation you see in baseball, where a player hitting allows, anytime a player gets on base, that's not an out, right? And everyone else gets effectively 1/9 of an extra at bat. That's very rigid in-game correlation. What is really happening in some of these basketball correlation here is it's almost allowing us to, let me see here. I don't know why. Oh, it must be on old slates. Okay, yeah, you can. So it's allowing us to almost, if you think every player, right, when you build a DFS lineup, you're looking for a ceiling outcome of every single player. When NBA correlations are high, what we are essentially doing is trying, and actually this is true of any sport where we have the correlation slider up, we're trying to have less independent, like, dice rolls, I guess, of individual players, right? So, like, if we think about Anthony Davis being slightly positively correlated with Dennis Schroeder on this slate way back in December, right? The bigger the slate is, so the bigger the slate is, the bigger the contest is, and the less entries each player has, the less our lineup becomes about building an optimal lineup, and it more comes about beating all the other contests in all the other lineups in the contest. And we can then start to think about, we get just the slightest bit of edge by recognizing this correlation over the entire game set between Anthony Davis and Dennis Schroeder, right? This isn't something you could necessarily just explain away, right? This is just the correlation that we found in our game sets. Why are these two players correlated? Well, they are just over the course of 5,000 game simulations. We can express a little bit of an edge in a big single entry contest where everyone gets one lineup, for example, by accounting for those correlations a little bit. So same thing here, right? Kevin Durant, let's look at it like a negative correlation, is negatively correlated with some of these Boston players, right? Like that's complicated to explain. In baseball and football and these sports where correlation is so heavily important, it's very easy to just explain away the correlations. Basketball correlations are very complicated. So we're generally going to capture correlations with a high smart diversity, especially on single game slates when smart diversity is like maxed out. But for main slates throughout the regular season, it's not always as easy as you think to just explain away the correlation, because players can be positively correlated in certain game outcomes and negatively correlated in other game outcomes. That the best way to use it is to take advantage of it on very large slates, on very bigger contests where the total entry limit is lower for each player, because it's an edge that maybe doesn't get us closer to building the optimal lineup, but it gets us closer to building a lineup that has a greater individual chance of success compared to other lineups in the field, right? Basically, I guess last point on this before I kind of wrap the show up is Dennis Schroeder in this particular case, right, was projected at 37.48. Another player that might have been projected at 37.48 that night, somebody that's close, Julius Randle was 37.08, right? These two players are essentially equal, but we have this slight edge, this slight correlative effect over the course of every game simulation that on average, when Schroeder does well, Anthony Davis does well, that makes sense that maybe we would want to play those two players together. So you can see the difference there, right? Kind of complicated, a lot going on, not something as easy that you can just explain away like we can in baseball. So baseball, it's very easy to explain correlations. One batter hits or gets on base, the next batter comes up and there was no out, right? Football, same way. Quarterback throws to the wide receiver. They both score points. So basketball correlations are complicated. I think the community did a really good job of talking through this by noting, one, that correlations are lower. They approach zero, not because there are no game outcomes where players have correlated outcomes, but because across the entire set of simulations, they compete with each other, right? And you automatically get access to those different types of game outcomes with a high smart diversity. But the final point I would add in there is that correlations in NBA are complicated. They're not as easily explainable. So we only really want to start turning correlation up on really big, massive slates where we're not as interested in like finding that optimal lineup, right? So that's pretty complicated. I hope that came out well. I'm going to go right back and listen to this recording here right after we hop off here to process this, timestamp it, get it up on YouTube for everybody that watches later. And I really hope I came across in that conversation in the way I intended, because it's kind of a complicated idea. And maybe we can spend a little bit more time talking about correlations, like a deeper dive into what correlations looks like for different sports and why numbers are what they are and why our sliders are what they are, because it might be helpful to spend a little bit more time on that. But if anyone has any more questions or wants to chat a little bit more about that, we can pick that up again more in the NBA channel or the Office Hours channel on Slack, or talk about it in our next show. For now, we are 3 minutes over. I will start to wrap us up quickly. Thank you all again for tuning in. If you have any questions for me that you'd like answered on the show, your places you can go to are Slack on Office Hours. We already talked about all the many reasons to get into Slack. If you're not in here already, get in here. We've got sim alerts, we've got great conversation, and we've got the Office Hours channel. You can email us, support@sabersim.com. If you want it answered on the show specifically, call it out, but we will also take some of our favorite questions we're getting in through support and answer them here on the show. Tomorrow, same time, 2 p.m. Eastern, esports strategy session. We're really excited for that. Let us know if you have any questions on those same channels about esports that you want us to tackle on tomorrow's show. And we will be back Friday, 2 p.m. Eastern, for our final Office Hours episode of the week. So if there are any Office Hours questions that you want us to answer in the last session of the week, we would be happy to do so then. Thank you all so much again for making the show possible, for submitting questions every day. It is getting bigger and better every day. So we will just keep it going. If there's anything else we can do to make the show serve you guys a little bit better, feedback is also greatly welcomed. So for now, I will let everyone get on with their afternoon. I'm sure it is enough of listening to me talk here on stream. Enjoy the rest of your day, and we'll see you guys 2 p.m. Eastern tomorrow for the esports strategy session. All right. Cheers.